President, some Vietnamese veterans see echoes of their experience in this withdrawal in Afghanistan. Do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam, with some people feeling...
None whatsoever. Zero. What you had entire brigades breaking through the gates of our embassy. 6, if I'm not mistaken. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comparable.
Taliban insurgents entered Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, on Sunday, an Interior Ministry official said, as the US evacuated diplomats from its embassy by helicopter. The senior official told Reuters the Taliban was coming in from all sides, but gave no further details. There was no reports of fighting.
Hey, welcome to the Boardwalk Podcast. This is not going to be it'll be an interesting episode, but it's not going to be a fun one. Since the last episode, the Taliban are in complete control of Afghanistan and made any of our predictions seem very, very optimistic. So I think we predicted Kandahar to fall by September, and the whole damn country fell in about 7 days. So let's talk about it, man. Where do you guys want to start?
I guess for starters, we are joined by the illustrious Mik Lopez. Again, Mick reached out to me yesterday, and I thought, what better option than to have our favorite Irish Mexican back on the show to talk about the fall of Afghanistan. And just a quick show note before that, I found a post on Instagram. One of our followers shared something, and it was a post written by a podcast page, speaking to people that went to Afghanistan who served over there and who are watching what has happened over the last roughly week and a half, and like the tornado of varying emotions that we're all going through right now. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. And it is a really nice post about, we did what we were supposed to do, right? You don't feel like it was in vain and that it was a lost cause. The issue here falls on military leadership and our elected leaders and, the Afghans, and most of that is probably true. And so I shared that. Then I looked at their page, and they're called the Panjway Podcast. And it's a couple of guys, Luke and Curtis, who were infantrymen with the 3rd Infantry Division, who were in Panjway, Kandahar, because nothing screams Afghanistan like heavy infantry. But they were down there, and I started listening to their podcast, and it's a really good podcast. So if you're out there and you listen to our podcast and you like our podcast, which I hope you do, go listen to the Panjway Podcast, and I'll link that in our show notes before that gets uploaded. But I shared their story. I followed them. In turn, they followed us back, and they shared our podcast, and we've, I think, tripled our viewership in the last 4 days because of that. So Luke and Curtis, if you guys are hearing this, thank you very much for that. We're just, we're trying to get the story out like you guys. So that's greatly appreciated. And now I guess we'll go into the bad news. Yeah, I think you're right, Kyle. It is surprising that the four of us were optimistic about how long Afghanistan would hold, compared to what the apparently intel community has been telling the president, or what has been fabricated once it leaves the intel community to the president. We were always the pessimist as to how long Afghanistan would hold off the Taliban. So like a quick rundown, like it started on August 6th when Zaranj in Nimruz province fell. And then over the next 3 or 4 days, you'd have 1 or 2 districts fall. I think by day 5, there were 7 or 8 provinces that had fallen to the Taliban. And then just the fucking floodgates opened up. And the Taliban were taking 4 or 5 provinces a day, to the point that on the 14th of August, They had surrounded Kabul on all sides, and on the 15th, they just walked into the city. Uh, most of the fighting, well, most of the territorial gains after the first couple of days involved very little fighting. You know, whether it was Ansaf just putting their weapons down or Ansaf fleeing, and we'll get into that later on because there might be some positive news out of that. It looks like there was just no effort on the side of the Afghans, and I'm looking at the just how the news is portraying it, and I I think the most consistent emotion is just anger, and it's anger for a couple of reasons. It's the obvious anger of what the hell did we do for 20 years out there for this to be the result. And I'm also angry, like hearing President Biden talk yesterday, and I watched it again before we hit the record button just so it'd be fresh in my mind. And like after he spoke, we're just going with, well, this was a failure of the Afghan military. And the UN Secretary General Jens Stolberg, um, he said the same thing. This is a failure of the Afghan military. And Bill Roggio and Tom Jocelyn from the Long War Journal very rightly in their most recent podcast episode pointed out that when we signed that peace agreement with the Taliban in February of 2020, that gave the Taliban carte blanche to just focus all efforts against the Afghans. And they suffered record casualties in the last year and a half. So you have major attrition in a force that is already prone to corruption and Gulf soldiers. Like in hindsight, I don't think we should be too surprised that it fell as fast as it fell.
I
Yeah.
would agree with you. Oh, sorry. Hey, for the listeners, this is Mik Lopez, the recurring guest. Glad to be here. But I'm going to agree with you, Zach. I was also feeling a lot of the same surprise initially, but after thinking about it, we shouldn't be as shocked. We witnessed this group right here, in particular in Uruzgan, a Taliban offensive in which they took the majority of the districts without firing a single shot, using their tried and true method of intimidation. So why is it a big shock to us now that maybe the scale's larger? Maybe now it's a provincial capital that's going without a shot being fired, but it's still the same technique. Intimidate. Ansaf is not willing to fight. The people that were willing to fight got fucked up over the last year and a half, like you alluded to. And everyone remaining was like, you know what? I'm smarter than this, so I'm just gonna throw my arms down, become a farmer, and continue living. I don't think we should be as shocked as we are, as shitty as it is.
Yeah. I mean, from the time that the peace talks initially started, I mean, it's been what, a year and a half now at this point. It was sometime in early 2020 that they initiated them, and so the Taliban, devastated the ANA, and so it's. I think it would be unfair of us to look at this as everything suddenly collapsing down without a fight. It's been a fight that they've basically been fighting on their own in a lot of cases, because the US was so drawn down for at least a year, and we're talking about thousands of casualties during that period. And so I don't know, it's rough, it's heartbreaking to see. Earlier on, I think probably a week ago or a little longer, we saw a story about commandos that had surrendered, that were still being killed by the Taliban, and there was a video of them surrendering, and like right before the execution, and just the look in their eyes, just complete exhaustion, and just almost acceptance of their fate, because of how brutally they'd been fighting and dealing with the sort of onslaught of the Taliban horde as it descended on them was tough to see.
But you have to wonder, I mean, how kind of what the method and channels were to kind of facilitate the Taliban moving in with over the last 10 days with very little resistance. Like what did they have channels open with the government? Did they have channels open with our government? Because I mean, a good thing to come out of this, I think, is the fact that I mean, if it's inevitable the Taliban take the country over, then it's not. There's worse ways to go about it than a mass surrender of the current government. I mean, it could be a brutal, bloody, thousands and thousands dead over the course of months takeover. I don't know. It was inevitable. We talked about that on the podcast. So what's the, is this really the worst thing that could possibly happen?
I think I'm inclined to think or believe that Pashtunwali saved a lot of lives over the last week and a half. At least I hope that's what happened. Right? The only if there was a backdoor agreement with the Taliban and either the Afghan government or our government, if that's the case, make that agreement known. Take your medicine. Hey, this is inevitable. Starting August 15th, or pick your day, we're going to have a transitional government. Because there were reports coming out that Secretary of Defense Austin and Secretary of State Blinken talked to Ashraf Ghani like the day before Ghani fled, and apparently urged him to resign and start working towards a transitional government with the Taliban. And when I saw that, my first thought was, I think this was our best case scenario for Afghanistan, right? That there would be some sort of transitional government with the potential for a power sharing agreement, however unlikely, given the momentum that the Taliban had, right? So I think more than anything, I would be inclined to believe that Taliban commanders at the district level, or maybe even at the provincial level, the shadow government was reaching out to their Jaroa counterparts through messengers or what have you, and they just had the agreement. Because you saw in some places where Taliban walked in and everybody just everybody laid down their weapons, and it's super early. I'm not going to hold that as a shining example of what this Taliban government will be, but for now there is relative peace, and I think for now that is what a country that has been at war for over 40 years is looking to have, unless you're in the Panjir.
Yeah. I mean, you can kind of see that with the capture or surrender of Ismail Khan up in Herat. Mm-hmm. I mean, they took him. It seemed like they took him relatively bloodlessly, and they're probably going to. It seems to me like they're going to sort of incorporate him into their new government, because he's already in place there and he already has a power base.
Yeah, I mean, they would be
not to mention he's a political arm to Iran for them as well. So kind of works out there.
Sorry.
So are the Taliban learning from their previous takeover, 30 years ago? Are they taking already established and respected heads, such as Ismail Khan, maybe some heads of government agencies, and maybe the more effective ones, and keeping them in place? Or are they maybe aligning Taliban party members, if you will, but maybe some that actually have backgrounds in engineering to head departments? Or are we going to see the same thing where we're just shoving Hubab, whoever, in a provincial or in a government head? They're heading a department that has no experience and is just going to drive it into the ground and cause the country to go into even further ruin.
I saw a story on the Afghan side. It was posted there. I can't remember what news agency it was from, but I mean, the Taliban went to a hospital in Kabul and told all the, even the women doctors and nurses that work there that they could keep working. I think they kept the health director that worked with Jaroa. I think they're keeping the health director in place, stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, that's one way. If you have, if you take over a government that exists, and that's pretty much what they did. They just swapped who's in charge. I mean, you might as well keep the effective people if they're going to be willing to work with you. I mean, why get rid of all your doctors just because they're women? Like, I mean, you already have a shortage of people working, it's like, I don't know. That seems to be the logical thing. But yeah, I mean, of course, it's early. I mean, we still have U.S. Marines there in Kabul evacuating people on planes. They're probably going to be there a while. The Taliban said, foreigners are not going to be harmed or whatever. You just have to register if you're going to stay, or just you can leave. I mean, I don't know. They're not going in there and just shooting people, in the streets of Kabul. They're not hacking people up in the streets of Kabul yet. So when everything clears out and they have more control and they've been there longer, yeah, it may be worse. I don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're really not going to have a good view of what the new Taliban, emirate of Afghanistan is going to look like until there isn't as much media coverage of them. So I mean, a few months from now, when American news agencies or the BBC or whoever aren't shining a spotlight on them, we might get little bits and pieces, probably through internet sources, of how they're really governing.
I wonder if they got this far in their planning cycle, or if this caught them by surprise and they pulled a good old U.S. Army move and said, "Wow, this happened way faster than we anticipated. Let's just spitball it from here, boys." Or if they actually had a contingency plan in the event that they take over the Afghan government in a short period of time.
Listen, I was assured by Defense Department press spokesman James Kirby yesterday that we plan for everything. Okay, so I don't know what you're talking about. Clearly, when we steamrolled through Afghanistan, the plan was to pretend like we didn't have a plan. Everybody knows that, right?
Well,
now as for like what to expect from the Taliban, I think the only answer, well, not the only, but maybe the best answer is ask me again in 6 months, right? Like I don't. And yeah, you're right, Kyle, where you're talking about the Taliban going down to, I think it was the Mirwais Hospital in Kandahar, and they said, yeah, female doctors and nurses, you're fine. But even with the old Taliban, if I'm not mistaken, like with their interpretation of Islam, women can be nurses. Like women can be in the healthcare field, and that's basically it. So I could see essentially like a grandfather clause for the doctors, right? And then nurses, like, yeah, that's fine. They had female nurses in the 90s. What I've seen is I think they're trying really hard to be diplomatic right now, right? Like I think Pakistan has worked with them over the last 20 years to explain to them how how you run a country, and you have to be diplomatic. You can't just go in and start killing all the people you fought against, even though there's video getting out of them doing exactly that, despite saying that they're not going to do that right now. I think they're going to put on a face, like they have to. They're the center of the world's eye right now. They have to put on the diplomatic face, and in time, I would not be surprised if we see them revert right back to what they were in the 90s. And I think a very good example of that is Clarissa Ward, who works for CNN. Like she's out in Kabul, and she's talking to these Taliban commanders, and like apparently she was standing too close to men. How dare she? And so like they're telling her she needs to back out of the way. She went down to Ghazni and was speaking to Taliban commanders at Ghazni at an old captured Ansaf compound, and they were assuring her, oh yes, women will have the rights that are afforded to them under Islam. It's like, yeah, well, that's under your interpretation of Islam, and those women's rights are, she's like huddled away to a separate compound with women and little girls where she sleeps overnight, and she's talking to them and asking them, how many of these girls go to school, and like, oh, none of these girls are going to school anymore. Like they haven't been to school since the Taliban showed up. They shut down all the girls' schools. Like they didn't even segregate. They just shut down the girls' schools, right? So I think what you're seeing, especially in like the urban areas like Kabul, they'll probably show a little more restraint, but I wouldn't be surprised if you get out to the backwoods areas, northern Helmand, western Kandahar, and they're back to doing what it is they wanted to do in the 90s.
And
yeah. I mean, it's important to remember that they're still following, the Deobandist sect of Islam. So, God.
But they're also not unified either in
I'm
their
so sorry,
in their command structure. Not like the Army, where we come up with some orders, it trickles down, the guidance is clear and concise. I mean, we're talking about TBSL, Taliban senior leadership, saying, hey, establish control in your district, and we'll report back during the next shura. And it's up to those commanders to figure out how they want to run the show. If they want to continue the bachabazi, they go for it. If they want to suppress women further, they go for it. It's really up to the individual guys, and it's like even at checkpoints, how much can you get away with before your boss gets mad at you? Did we all agree we're only going to charge a toll of 5 Afghani, or am I going to know that my boss is completely lazy and is too busy getting high on opium, and I know I can charge 50 Afghani per truck, and no one will find out, and no one's going to fight me because I'm in the Taliban. Anyways, that's an exaggerated view on the situation, but I think they're really disorganized at this point.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, and the decentralized nature of having the entire country, and then different much smaller sections being run by this Taliban group or that Taliban group. It's much. You're definitely. It's not all going to be like a unified. Like a unified doctrine that they're following. Things will probably be harsher in rural areas. Especially with like, oh, hey, we found out that you're teaching your daughters how to do math, and stuff like that. That's definitely not gonna fly in some mountain town over in Faryab compared to Kabul, where they'll probably be a little lighter on people.
I did enjoy seeing the media wanting to spotlight the Shia Hazara Taliban commander in Daikundi. I'm like, that dude's a fucking figurehead, right? Like, he has no actual authority. I guarantee you, because we thought that there might be some sort of a resistance from the Shia Hazaras because they'd be backed by Iran. Understanding that Iran has supported the Taliban over the last, at least the last decade, right? That there was open source information on that all over the place, that Iran has backed the Taliban because the Taliban don't like us. And I think with them just going into Daikundi, going into Gore, and not firing a single round, I think there is a almost 100% chance that the Taliban worked something out with the Iranian government, where the Shia Hazara will, as a show of ceremony, basically pledge the allegiance to the Taliban, recognize them as a government, and then the Taliban will leave them alone. I think that's most likely.
If there wasn't a deal in place, we'd almost certainly be seeing some kind of like IRGC led resistance movement in the area. Probably in a way where it wouldn't be reported on Unclass that it's IRGC involvement. But,
yeah, we wouldn't know about it, but there'd
be something.
Yeah. We definitely saw instances of IRGC Taliban collaboration out west, probably 4 years ago. And then Russians getting involved in it. That shouldn't be a real shock for a lot for the people in the know, but I guess people that may or may not be listening to this, there's definitely collaboration that has occurred in the past, and it just provides, I guess, further evidence that these theories that we have some truth behind them.
Yeah, I mean the ISIS, sort of invasion of Afghanistan probably helped cement that bond, at least in the West, and so it makes sense that they'd continue it.
Well, and the Russian embassy, I mean, when we were evacuating ours, which we need to talk about this real quick. Joe Biden said that this would not be Saigon 1975, and that's exactly what it fucking was.
But I mean, I made that joke.
Like that is
when we first started out. I was like, oh, what? Gonna be like Saigon, and I made that joke with people when I was in Afghanistan. Like, oh, it's gonna look like Saigon when the Taliban are here, and sure enough, dude, like I didn't expect.
Well, and then when he did his little presser last month, and they asked him about it, and he's like, no, and like, well, why not? And he's like, and I think we talked about it then. He's the Taliban, or the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, which I hate when he says the entire thing out. It's so long. Has 300,000 soldiers. they're some of the best equipped soldiers in the world. Like, okay, like he totally glossed over the training of these soldiers. Right? He kept talking about there's 300,000 of them, which there isn't, and he kept talking about how well equipped they are, which now the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has a very well equipped army.
Right.
Yeah. The new main weapon of the of the Taliban is the M4. We talked about that privately amongst ourselves this past
You
week.
guys think
We see all these pictures of Taliban with M4, no, M4s and M16s.
who produces our
wild.
M4s? Is it Colt?
They produce some. I think it's mainly FN.
Okay.
FNH.
Do you
Soon to be
think?
Amazon.
Do you
Let
think
they get on Amazon.
like Raytheon and Lockheed and them are going to start bidding for contracts to maintain the Islamic Emirates arsenal?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Biden's not lying when he says they're, the army was well equipped, and like he
No,
said
he's
in his,
not.
His speech the other day when he talks about, it just slipped my mind, but yeah, he starts talking about like, yeah, we gave them an army bigger than some of our NATO allies. We paid for an army,
Most of our
bigger
NATO
than NATO
allies.
allies, and now the Taliban have completely control of it. Yeah, like who's going to maintain those Mi-17s? Who's going to maintain the Black Hawks or the A-29 Super Tucanos they have now? Like, who's going to fly them? I don't know. I'm sure they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm sure they can get pilots. from
And
somewhere.
there was that video of the Taliban flying a helicopter, right? And people on social media was like, how long is that going to last? I'm like, and I said this before the podcast started. So for everybody out there who doesn't think the Taliban are going to be able to maintain these aircraft, do you honestly believe that Pakistani ISI hasn't had some sort of planning set in place that they're going to have to show these guys how to fly fucking helicopters and shit once they acquire them from the Afghan government? Like, that's going to be the next step. It'll happen. Like with what Biden said, I think we're all in agreement. Like, it's a shitty deal no matter what. And you got to rip the Band-Aid off eventually. So he gets kudos for that. But he and Donald Trump get, in my opinion, they get plenty of blame because this whole getting interpreters and those who helped us out could have been done a lot better. And now you're seeing chaos at the airport. Why are we using the Kabul airport as the evac site instead of the fucking military base right down the road in Bagram, where we can have better security and better control of who gets in and who gets out and getting people there in an orderly, safer fashion? And you don't have people literally falling out of wheel wells of airplanes above the fucking clouds. Like
surrounding planes on takeoff and stuff.
Yeah.
The Long War Journal's podcast actually brought up a good point about that. It's sort of some of the reasons to have issue with both the Trump and Biden administrations is that we entered these peace talks as though we were actually going to sort of like reincorporate the Taliban into Afghanistan, which that's been talked about for at least the last 10 years, if not longer. But what we really should have been doing, because it's much more realistic, is establishing, hey, we're leaving, don't attack us on the way out. If you do, we'll come back and extend this conflict even longer.
And they don't want us back, so they wouldn't have touched us. Right?
Yeah,
because go ahead, Stu. Go ahead.
Oh no, you
say, because this, when Joe Biden inherited the White House, we had 2,500 U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Like, they're not holding the Taliban back. They're there as advisors and shit. Like, we haven't had a significant U.S. military presence in Afghanistan in years, right? Like, we always have QRF or Quick Reactionary Force, Global Reactionary Force capabilities, but the God's honest truth is the only reason the Taliban haven't been attacking us is because of that peace deal. And that peace deal was a bad deal for everybody, except the Taliban, because one, we didn't include the Afghan government, as inept as Ashraf Ghani is, and he's next on the airing of grievances list that we're compiling right now. He wasn't involved. Zalmay Khalilzad sold the fucking Afghan people down the river, which, I mean, is par for the course for him. And we honest to God believed, we being the U.S. government, not being the four of us, because we know this is bullshit. Like, Donald Trump came out and said, oh, well, the Taliban will be a partner for countering Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. It's like, all those reports, like, I don't think there's a single president who had more bad, like anonymous reports about them during their administration than him. But any report about him not reading his intel packets is clearly true, because the Taliban and Al Qaeda are thick as fucking thieves, right? Have been going back to Omar and Bin Laden. And to sign that peace deal and tell the world that the Taliban is going to help rein in Al Qaeda, their oldest friend, and sell the Afghan people down the fucking river, do nothing to help get those interpreters and their families, and maybe even some of the commandos who are worth a damn, out of there, is just shameful, right? I remember I was watching, watched the Biden press conference yesterday, and then afterwards I just sat down on my couch, and I think after 3 days of not knowing what to do, I just cried for like 15 minutes. And it's the first time I cried in a long fucking time, right? Because I'm 33 years old, not really a lot of reasons to cry these days. And I finally reached a point yesterday where it's the only logical thing I could do. I feel a little better after that, right? But for Biden to come out and say what he did, what he said yesterday, which is basically it's everybody else's fault, but the buck stops with me. Go fuck yourself, dude. That just absolution of all responsibility, as if he has no role in this as the president, as if and he always touts, I have more foreign policy experience. Well, yeah, you've been in Washington for 50 years, and look at us. That
he was in the White House for 8 years.
Yeah, exactly.
People seem to be forgetting.
You know what? He disagreed with us staying in Afghanistan past 2009, and when Barack Obama told him to oversee it, he didn't push back on his boss. He should have. Maybe he should have resigned. Right? If you feel so firmly and strongly about something like that, he should have resigned. And while we're at it, Mark Milley needs to resign. Lloyd Austin needs to resign. Everybody within the Department of Defense who still hasn't said a fucking word to their soldiers, airmen, sailors, and Marines who are having a really hard time right now, who they haven't said a fucking word to any of them. Shameful. Fucking shameful.
It is shameful. And like we were talking about, I think me and you, Zach, in a text, is like nobody that orchestrated this whole thing is ever going to face any repercussion from it.
Nope.
Like the Westerners that orchestrated this whole debacle from the very beginning, I mean, they're going to go home. They're going to eat dinner tonight. They're not going to think about it. They'll be like, oh, that sucks. Whatever, I guess my money dried up. The Raytheon CEO doesn't care. They'll fund some other war to, sell weapons to. It's like, it's none of the people that really orchestrated it they don't care. They don't have to deal with it.
No.
But now it's like you have this whole country now in chaos and turmoil while you just sit there and eat dinner and go about your day. It's like, yeah, I just want some justice for these people that just had no plan, that had no idea of what to do. I just want some justice, and there isn't going to be any. It's just, that's so frustrating to me, Yeah. It's like, it's so frustrating to me.
And it breaks your fucking heart looking at all of these interpreters and Afghan supporters of us while we were over there, that we promised them that we'd take care of them and we'd have their backs. If you help us here, then we'll make sure you're safe. And
well, there might
a bunch of them.
Go ahead.
A bunch of them are gonna die. It's a bunch of them are gonna fucking die.
There might be few things as useless as a promise from the U.S. government at this point, man.
Oh yeah, especially a promise from the CIA.
Yeah,
we're kind of killing ourselves for our next nation building venture. Looking for allies in the whatever, maybe Cuba or whatever country we're going to next.
I think some of the people I'm most kind of mad just thinking about is the NDSF people that I met and worked with that I knew were shitty. They, for example, the guy that gave me a green on blue threat, I was advising his core headquarters. His boss was their ISR manager, who was just a sergeant, and he was a good dude and wanted to see progress in this country and was smart. and as far as I could tell, not corrupt. And they had a guy that was working in targeting, another sergeant who was a fucking whiz, and he was incredible, and he was acing all of our training. And then their assistant, their T-boy, who he was too old to like do a bocce bazi kind of situation. He was just basically a useless private that they assigned to that office. He was illiterate, so they just had him file papers and make tea. Um, but that's the guy who gave us a green on blue thread, and I know he's also the same guy who, once the Taliban came through Ghazni, um, or Gardez, sorry, said, "Oh no, I'm cool with you guys. I've been undermining the Americans this whole time. Actually, I have some names for you of some guys you might be interested in. Here's where they live. Here's their brother's name. Here's their father's name. Those are the guys I hate the most right now.
Yeah.
Just because I don't know, just uh, yeah. But yeah, Zach, you know what, man? It's okay to cry. I cry all the time.
Thanks.
Um,
I
makes me
appreciate
feel
that.
good.
Like I remember, or I recall, and we've talked about this several times. We're going to talk about it just one more time. When the boss went to talk to General Milley, when General Milley was the chief of staff of the army, and he asked how the situation was. And this is right after General Nicholson had said the Taliban is staring defeat in the face. And we told the colonel not to say that. We told him to tell him the truth, that I think we just lost, we'd lost some territory like out in western Kandahar or eastern Kandahar. You take your pick. There's always a good chance you lost something in one of those two parts of the province. And we're like, just let them know we're having resupply issues. ANSAF is not receptive to the training. They're not willing to fight. All these things that were happening. Wafadar's a piece of shit. Like all these things that we've been saying for months. And he went and he told General Milley that the Taliban were staring defeat in the face. And this is where my frustration with General Milley comes from. When the colonel came back and he told us that that's what he said, we said, well, what did General Milley say? He said General Milley immediately called him out on the bullshit. So then why, if General Milley knows that that's a fucking lie, did that not get communicated higher? Because he is General Nicholson's boss, last I checked. Chief of Staff of the Army is higher than the U.S. Army commander for Afghanistan. He's Chief of Staff of the fucking Army. There's one guy above him, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So why did that not, if General Milley knew what the truth was, why did that not go forward?
But we all knew it was bullshit.
Yes.
Everybody in Afghanistan knew it was bullshit. Even if they don't admit it, they still knew it was. And it still went on this long. And that's what I don't understand. Go ahead, Nick.
I was gonna say, I think you're definitely right, Cal. Like everyone knows it's shit, including and up to the president. But everyone has the same response where they don't want to fight the system around them, right? So down at our level, yeah, absolutely. Like we'll just tell it how it is at the end of the day, and that's honestly what we're paid for, or what we were paid for, was to give objective assessments. But I think once they've reached that certain level, like maybe the 04, maybe even the 03 level, they know like this is shit, but I'm just gonna tell whoever what they want to hear, so I don't get attacked by my peers or my boss. And it's the same as me telling the colonel like, oh yeah, all of our analysts are gainfully employed all day. No one's ever surfing Reddit. No one's going to the gym for 4 hours. That's not happening, right? He knows I'm full of shit, but I'm just going to tell him that because on my NCOER, like I want to make sure like everyone's staying productive and all that crap, right? So not necessarily saying he'd dock me on that, but it's the same thing. Like I'm just going to tell him crap, even though I know he knows what's real. The motivations beyond that, like at the GO level, why they continue to perpetuate, this false narrative, that's beyond me. But I do think that there is a certain amount of peer pressure within the system, that if you were to, kind of speak out against the narrative, you'd be ostracized. And I guess the majority of people just aren't willing to make that sacrifice at that level. I think if Leesman had said to General Milley, like, no, we're actually failing our mission currently. Who knows if he may have been sent to Kuwait and been replaced with, someone that was more willing to just fabricate lies, because Leesman stood his ground on a lot of things. He didn't stand his ground on everything, but I think he was pretty strategic with what he was doing most
Yeah,
of the time.
yeah. That story is more about General Milley than him, just because of the position he's in now as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And yeah, there was some accountability at our level because I was fired. Right, like I was fired a little over a year into my actually about 14 months into my time in Afghanistan. So I guess now is a good time to elaborate on this story. After Mick, after you guys left, Turn 2 of the Texas National Guard came in, and then the 82nd Airborne came in. And we touched on this a little bit before, but we were doing district assessments. Right? And that's like it's a once a year thing where it just seems like everybody in the country does district assessments for the various provinces that their analysts covering. And I gave the two districts in southern Kandahar, Shoreback and Registan. I made them red. I made them Taliban controlled, and my justification for it was that the district center in Shoreback wasn't even in Shoreback. The water supply had been damaged to the point that they couldn't really sustain any operations there, and the Taliban had complete freedom of movement and operation within the district. And I don't know how that's anything other than red. And so I made it red. And then for Registan, it was more the same. There was a district center in Registan. It was manned by the Afghans, but they had no control over the rest of the district. Taliban had complete freedom of movement and freedom of operation. And they had the will of there's like 7 people in Registan, right? And three are Afghan government, 3 are Taliban, and one's like the person they're fighting for influence for, right? And so I'm like, if they wanted to call that one yellow, maybe I would have conceded on it. But they came back to me and they wanted me to make both of the districts contested. And I said they're not contested, right? There's no fight in Shoreback. The Taliban own it outright without firing a single round because they destroyed the well and because the Shoreback district center had to move to Registan because they couldn't sustain operations in the district. And we went back and forth for 2 days. And every time they'd come back to me and they'd tell me I needed to justify my choice, so I'd come back with 3 or 4 more intel reports. Every time I got up to like a dozen reports explaining why this district no longer belongs to the Afghan government or the Afghan military. And the commander of the 82nd, I don't remember his name. I wish I did. I'd call him out right now. I would take my chances on the libel lawsuit. He overrode me and he made it yellow. I let my opinions on the matter be known, and a week later, I was working for the aviation task force on the other side of the airfield.
Yeah,
It's hype. It's
Yeah,
hyper
well,
normalization.
it's nuts. Like it's not only that they're pushing back because it reflects negatively on their career. If they're not taking this district, which is the only explanation I can come up with for why no one wants to tell the fucking truth about the war when you're fighting it. But on top of that, the parameters that they gave us for making a district red had a lot of like unnecessary I guess red tape. Like for a district to be red, the district governor had to have abandoned the district. It's like, dude, if the district governor is just holed up in the district center and the Taliban are leaving him there because they control everything else, the district's fallen. Like, I don't. Why are we pretending that it's anything else? And I'm right there with you, Zach. You walked me out of the office on my last day there shortly before you were fired yourself.
That's right.
And it's just
that
just
just
trying to tell the truth about what was actually happening in the war was enough to get you kicked out so that the false groupthink could continue and people could continue to perpetuate the lie that things are going well, because hopefully you'll be on a new assignment by the time things fall apart like they are now and it doesn't affect your career.
You should have said Registan is double plus good. Sir.
Double plus. It's double plus green, dude.
But no, so this sounds to me just like, just an issue that, goes beyond the borders of Afghanistan and is really a problem with the military that, kind of fosters toxic environments. And that's kind of like a hero worship of the commander, or just yeah, really that's what it comes down to. Sometimes a good example for me is the deputy commander at the time when 3rd Brigade 101st was there at the time, Colonel Burris, who is now Brigadier General Burris, and is I just Googled as being appointed as the head of the U.S. Infantry School at Fort Benning. But his team loved him, and that's great to have a commander that a lot of people like. But when your commander is just like a raging, crazy person with ulterior motives and political agendas at the end of the day, looking for a career advancement, that's not good. Don't want to get into too many stories, but an example I have was while we were there towards the end of my deployment, the appearance of drones or quadcopters, if you will, was beginning to increase. And they typically preceded a catastrophic attack, whether it was a VBID or an attack on a district center, something like that. So it was a good indicator that we were able to identify, if you see this, something's coming within a few minutes. So I did a study with the warrant that was there at the time, Chief Baldy. Y'all know which one I'm talking about. We did a joint report on UAV sightings in our AO, and one of them that was reported was at CAF. Some members of the 3rd Brigade 101st swore they saw a drone hovering near a POE or something like that, and then it zoomed off. I did some investigation, some analysis, found out it was just a Scan Eagle coming in. It came in at the same time every night. And for those who aren't aware, a Scan Eagle is a medium-sized ISR asset, a UAV. And they're pretty cool. They're hard to see at night. The only way you would know is there is when they turn on the landing lights and it has a blinking red strobe. And it flies into a net.
And they crash all the fucking time.
The Scan Eagles are pretty reliable in my experience, but yes, some of them crash. But yeah, so basically, I disproved this. So we did a whole brief to like all the staff, senior NCOs within the other parts of the staff, maybe even the BDOC was there, our base defense unit. And I briefed the Kandahar incident. I said, this wasn't an incident involving a drone. This was a Scan Eagle, and then I proceeded, and Colonel Burris stopped me right there, and he's like, "It was a drone," and I was like, "I checked with your Scan Eagle team, sir, because it fell under the BDOC, which was the battalion headquarters for the 3rd, or it was the battalion that was the Brigade Special Troops Battalion or company or whatever." Anyways, it was his team that told me it was a Scan Eagle. They said, no, we looked at it wrong. It was a Scan Eagle. So I said, sir, your team identified as a Scan Eagle. And he said, no, my guys know what they saw. It was a drone. We're right here at CAF. And I said, you know what, Roger that, sir, and just proceeded with my brief. So I allowed him to look like a dick in front of, this audience of his peers and subordinates. But the people leaving that room, I know half of them were like, man, Sergeant Lopez is a fucking cool guy and smart and knows how to research. And half of them were like, man, Colonel Burris is just the fucking coolest guy and just knows everything that's going on in the planet. Maybe if I kiss his ass some more, I can get a better rating on my, OER, whatever. But yeah, so that long story just to say, yeah, this groupthink is real. It permeates every aspect of the military. And gets in the way of a lot of stuff, including why we were in Afghanistan for 20 years and left without a solution. And that's my argument.
It really is hyper-normalization. I don't know if you've seen that documentary or that term about the Soviet Union. Toward the end of the Soviet Union, everyone in the Soviet Union knew the system was not right. Everyone knew it, but everyone pretended like it was. And that's how you lived your entire life. And that's what the military is like, at least in Afghanistan when I was there, when you guys were there, is you pretend everyone knows it's falling apart, and you pretend, like you said, you follow the narrative and you pretend, and everyone's going around pretending the whole time. And then when the Taliban takes over, you're just like, huh. And people act shocked, they act shocked when it all falls apart, when we've all been pretending for the past 20 years. And it's like, it's wild. Yeah, people are shocked that the Taliban control Afghanistan. I was shocked with how fast they took it, but I'm not shocked they
I,
control it. We've called that out here
I'm
before, so
surprised
many
at
times.
how just dumbfounded the media seems to be. Like, I know that they're going to report whatever the press secretary or James Kirby or whoever they're speaking to, the press secretary for insert federal agency. They're going to report that, but man, they talk to these guys behind closed doors. They got sources they won't give up who are telling them the truth, and this is off the record. You can't publish it. Like, so to act like this shit didn't happen, and then you know just I was watching the press conference that the Pentagon was doing with James Kirby and whoever this guy is that's like overseeing the special immigrant visa program. And there's an Afghan woman. She's a journalist there, man, and she fucking ripped into him, right? Like, understandably so. And she just asked, "Where is Ashraf Ghani?" So, guys, where the fuck is Ashraf Ghani? Nobody knows where the fuck this guy is. Like, he sits at his desk. He says that they're going to reconstitute and we're going to push and we're not going to let Kabul fall. Then 3 hours later, he's fucking out of the country. Nobody knows where the hell this guy is at. And we have said this before. We don't think he won the election. I think Abdullah won it. They could really use some people like him, which we're going to get into that next week because it looks like that may be happening. We'll have to wait and get a little more proof. But like, there's just Ashraf Ghani sold his fucking home country down the goddamn river and reportedly left with some bags of money. And I did see that he was apparently turned away from Tajikistan, but he might be in Oman or Dubai. Nobody knows. He's been fucking radio silent for 4 days now, 3 days.
Abdullah was an advocate of the U.S. leaving years ago. I'm not certain that it would have been any better at that time. Maybe worse.
I don't think it would have been any worse. I don't know how much worse it could really be with the way we departed, seemingly without any real planning. Now, I'm assuming a lot of the guys on the ground were getting mixed messages left and right, because that's how things go. And you're like, maybe we're staying, maybe we're not. And so I fully assume that the guys that were on the bases where we had to leave a bunch of equipment and we couldn't get a bunch of our allies out, basically were told at the last possible minute that they had to leave. And so I none of the blame really goes on them. But I mean, I don't know, it just feels so much like we're expecting to have a ton of time to leisurely stroll out of the country, and we could have started the process a long time ago.
When I was trying to cope with my feelings about Afghanistan, a few days ago, one of my friends sent me a podcast link. Do you want me to name it?
We'll throw it out there. If it's positive,
so I think it's I had mixed reviews, so but it's just my own personal opinions on it. But it's Terminal CWO. I don't know if it's a couple warrants playing off Terminal Lance or not, but I'd never listened to the podcast before. I only listened to this episode, and they just did kind of off the cuff how they're feeling about Afghanistan and how they understand other veterans may feel upset about the situation. And their stance was, hey, you did your job. You were looking out for the people on your left and your right. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. And I personally get a little annoyed with that stance, like I'm defending the Americans on my left and the Americans on my right. And in Afghanistan, I did that a few times, supporting a base defense operation or unit, or doing Overwatch during a U.S.-led patrol. But the primary reason that we're there, and when I enlisted, we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as I thought we were nation building. Like, I don't think, and this is me at 17 thinking, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. Like, I'll go in, make the world a better place, right? But still, even as I matured more, while still being part of these wars, I did care about the Americans to my left and my right as well, but I also cared about like these people that are that are suffering under this conflict that we brought upon them. And I guess I'm struggling with like what was our responsibility now that we brought the shit show to them. How much shit do we need to shovel up before we move on with our lives to the next conflict, or hopefully to a peaceful time period? Or do we just say, oh, look, you guys got covered in shit. You guys will figure it out. We're leaving. Those are my own conflicts, but yeah, those guys. I know that's a common standpoint. The Americans on your left and your right. Some people may be doing that. I just don't
So
uh,
I've
subscribe to
I've
that.
heard of Terminal CWO. I like a lot of their stuff. It's pretty decent. I would agree with you that I disagree with them. If at least from the standpoint that if the only reason you're there is to protect the guy to your left and your right, and I ran into plenty of people like that. Like that's not good. If somebody goes to court and their only charge is resisting arrest, like what the hell were you trying to arrest them for? Right? That's not good. It's the same concept. I'm there to watch out for my brothers on both my sides. Like you probably shouldn't be there if that's the only reason you're there. You probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah, because that precludes you need to be there doing something important, right? Like, of course, I mean, what's the goal? I mean, there was never a goal. I mean, it turns out. I mean, well, we talked about it, I think, in the counterterrorism episode. Kill terrorists, sure, yeah, we can do that. We're quite good at it. But then it turned into the nation building thing, like you mentioned, Nick. And then at the end of the day, you're just like, yeah, okay, well, I did my part. I defended some Americans, and I'm responsible, for putting away or putting in the ground some very bad dudes, right? But that is predicated on the need that we have to be there to begin with, and all the killing and all the violence, and that's my issue. All the killing, the violence, the destruction, the uprooting and changing people's lives for no reason at all. And it's like, sure, okay, I can feel good about some of the stuff I did, but in the bigger picture, I mean, you're looking at the trees for the forest here. The forest is darker. There's no reason to be there at all.
Yeah, did my actions improve the situation by trying to work on missions and operations that provided civil aid and stuff like that, or did I perpetuate the problem by even showing up in the first place? One foot on either side of the fence for me.
I think the
I think the important thing for the many veterans that are out there struggling with this like we are is that you went out there, your leaders gave you unrealistic parameters for which to conduct a mission that they gave you. You went out there and you conducted the mission to the best of your ability, and it's not your fault that your leadership didn't have a solid plan. That's I think that's the big thing. You went out there, you did what you were supposed to do, because what you're supposed to do is follow competent high level leadership that is sending you out there for a good reason with a solid plan that's hopefully going to succeed. And you did what you were supposed to do.
And like people are trying to figure out who to blame, and I would pretty much blame anybody with the decision making ability in the military, like any battalion or brigade commander or higher who was told the truth and did nothing. Right? Any general officer who was told the truth and did nothing, like they all share some blame. And I say that because I know this is going to be a very unstructured podcast because it's not raw emotion. I'm happy we're doing it on Tuesday instead of on Sunday when all this stuff happens, so we can kind of get some sort of composure, right? But like just the raw emotion of watching everything happen, and now you see the media and their whole thing is like, well, who do we blame? Is it Joe Biden's fault? Is it Donald Trump's fault? Like, how about it's everybody's fault? There's plenty of blame to go around, right? It's both of them. It's Barack Obama. It's Donald Trump. It's Ashraf Ghani. It's Hamid Karzai. Abdullah, who I kind of like he shares some blame for it too. Sure, Ishmael Khan, to an extent, shares some blame. Gulager Shirzai. There's plenty to go around. So let's stop trying to play fucking sides and say, oh, it's this person's fault or it's that person's fault. I tried to watch the major news networks yesterday because it's not like there's that many options, right? And I thought CNN actually did a relatively decent job of pointing out that, this doesn't land squarely on the shoulders of one president or another. And then I went to Fox News, and it's fucking Fox News, right? It's like just Joe Biden's incompetent and he's inept, and Donald Trump is rightly calling for Joe Biden to resign. I'm like, that's just fucking ridiculous, right? And then, like from there, they're bringing on members of Congress. Lindsey Graham was on there. Mitt Romney sent out a tweet. Piers Morgan, that piece of shit, sent out a tweet, and we've shared it internally amongst us, where he's like just getting mad at Joe Biden and say something needs to be done about, to help the women of Afghanistan. You're failing them and you're inept. And I will say to the Piers Morgans, to the Mitt Romneys, to the Lindsey Grahams of the world, go pick up a fucking rifle and do it yourself. We did it for 20 goddamn years. You guys sat back and did nothing. Okay. And before anybody points out that Lindsey Graham is in the Air Force Reserve, he's a fucking lawyer in the Air Force Reserve. Okay. If they want to do something about it, if they really want to help the people of Afghanistan that much, they can go pick up a rifle and they can do it on their own goddamn terms. Ismail Khan was 75 years old before, like, he still is 75 years old. Dostum is reportedly in Uzbekistan reconstituting his mujahideen. He's 67 years old. What's their fucking excuse? I think that's the thing that made me more angry than anything else, is that these people who have been around, who are at this point, they're legacy politicians, they're legacy media, like all of a sudden now they care and they want to send somebody else's kids to go die for political gain, to say that they didn't turn, like when the Afghans needed them the most, which was 20 years ago, they didn't turn their back. They can go fuck themselves. And that's where the American people need to hold their elected leaders accountable and vote these people out. Like, how have you not figured out what these guys' true colors are?
Dude, yeah. half of America can't like keep up with what happened 3 months ago.
I know.
Much less, they won't remember Afghanistan come the next election cycle. Ted Cruz, for example, we mentioned CNN, correspondent earlier, who was at the checkpoint where they told her to step aside. Ted Cruz accused her of cheering for the Taliban because she wore a hijab.
Well, right. They also, if I'm not mistaken, didn't they also, like, they totally took what she was saying out of context. She was standing there. So if you haven't watched it, and I apologize for speaking over you, Mick, if you haven't seen it, Clarissa Ward is in Kabul and she's talking to Taliban members, and locals are going up and getting pictures with the Taliban and what have you. And then they break into a "Death to America" chant. And Clarissa Ward says, and this is almost an exact quote, she says that they're standing here chanting "Death to America," but at the same time seem friendly. It is utterly bizarre. That's the entire quote, right? And then people are getting on social media and they're taking off that last part. And that last part is all the context you need. And like, oh, look at this. CNN is saying that these people chanting "Death to America" are friendly. It's like, that's not at all what she said, right? And Ted Cruz tweeted that out. Lindsey Graham has talked about it. People we know on Instagram, because like their red team or their blue team, they're tweeting. And I'm like, and I went in on Josh Abbott from the Josh Abbott band. He tweeted, or he posted on Instagram. I messaged him and he actually responded, nice guy, like his music, dislike his politics. And I said, hey, dude, this is not fucking true. And I sent him the entire the quote. And I was like, you need to keep this shit in context. Like, you're much more influential than I am, right? I got like 50 followers on my personal Instagram page. Like, you're one of the biggest names in Texas Red Dirt music. Like, don't fucking lie to people. This is the truth. This is what's happening. And like, this is what we've been dealing with for 20 fucking years in the military, is people lying when they're confronted with the truth. And he kind of backed off.
Did he say, hey, thanks for reaching out. Be sure to check out my new album dropping August 10th at
No,
Walmart?
he did not.
I just feel like we talk about like responsibility, and I feel partly responsible for it all too. I mean, even at the level that we were operating at. Yeah, I think Tolstoy says in War and Peace, during one of his essay portions of that novel, it's like, well, war only happens if down to the private. If the private decides to take up his rifle and go, and millions of them do it, then you can have a war. At the end of the day, it's like, I mean, I signed up for it, and I perpetuated some of this destruction, especially, what I did prior to the analysis stuff. And it's tough to come to terms with that, because it feels like I put 3 or 4 years or whatever into the Afghan mission total, and it all feels like it was wiped out instantly, and all that stuff I did is completely back to square one. But it wasn't. That all had an effect on somebody, and it all has a lifelong, lasting effect on people. But it feels like your progress is wiped out, but you've left some sort of negative, you've left some sort of negative impression, or caused some sort of negative thing to happen to other people in that time, even though it all gets wiped out. So, it's tough to come to terms with. And now I think I've told you guys before, like I'm pretty much a pacifist. I'm very anti-war, very anti-war. I, I, it's tough for me to get behind any sort of like military conflict. I'm kind of coming to terms with that. Like all that effort, all that violence and stuff. You kind of hope that it was for something, and it seemed to be for nothing. But it did negatively affect people. I kind of come out of this feeling like, America. You mentioned promises of America are not good anymore. I feel like America is dead and rotting in a shipping container in the Registan Desert. You know what I mean? Like that's how I feel about America. Like it's not a very patriotic thing to say. Nobody wants to hear it, but I feel like that. I feel like any America I grew up thinking about and having this ideal of an American society, it's dead. It died in Afghanistan 15, 16, 17 years ago.
It's eye opening flying over Afghanistan. So on my first deployment, 21-year-old Stu got to ride in his first helicopter. And I was flying from Bagram over to Paktia to pick up a prisoner, and I was just looking out the window, and it's like like there's some beautiful sights in Afghanistan, some picturesque mountains and some nice fields, and then you're going through it, and then you see craters everywhere, and you see just all of the like remnants of the last war, rusted out Russian tanks that are just still there. Like, they didn't clean up the trash from the last war, and we're over here, and there's like just bomb craters everywhere, and it's really growing up post 9/11. I wasn't hugely following the war in Afghanistan, especially since Iraq took so much precedence, but actually getting there, it has kind of a profound effect on, I think, a lot of service members, especially the younger ones that were more involved in the second half of the war. And yeah, Kyle, I mean, it's true. I mean, I think Zach might have talked about it on a previous podcast of how different your viewpoint becomes once you actually go to these places and sort of see the effects that you don't see back home. I don't know if I have a point
there. Well, that's kind of what this one is, right? This is just us getting shit off our chest at this point. There is one thing that has held over these 20 years. That's the Patriot Act. So and the TSA and the Department of Homeland Security. Like it's amazing. Somebody posted this is just a little meme type comment, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with the whole thing, but like, man, it seems like in Afghanistan you go out there and you want to be a fucking opium farmer, you can be an opium farmer, right? You want to do this, you want to do that, you pretty much have like all the freedom in the world to do that. To an extent, right? Meanwhile, in America, we've got the TSA, we've got the Department of Homeland Security, we've got the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on poverty, like all these things that just get in the way of being free. It's like we are less free now than we were on September 10th, 2001, and it has nothing to do with us fighting terrorism, right? It's legislation that has been passed in the name of keeping us safe and free, and it's insane. Like the anti-maskers and the anti-vaxxers of the current pandemic who are talking about, well, it's just government mind control. I'm like, well, that's silly. But then you remember, like, well, I have to get a new driver's license here in like the next month with a fucking star on it so that I can fly on an airplane. Like, why? I've got a passport.
Yeah, 2023, everybody.
Zach,
What's up?
You should just pull out your dog tags when you get to TSA and say, "Is this good enough identity?"
Maybe.
Turns out, no. You can order those on the internet. So.
Yeah.
Dude, so I had, as all of us did, TSA pre-check. And the day after I fucking ETS, I guess it expired, and I had a flight like 2 days later, and I forgot my TSA pre-check had expired, and I had to go through the line. And I got frisked by a trainee. Pretty sure they picked me so he could hit his frisking quota. And I was so angry, and I just stared at them in the face, and I was thinking, I still have a fucking active TS, you twats.
Where's the
My
nearest
son-
brown person? Get him over here in the line.
But they actually
My-
did find a knife in my backpack. I forgot I had one, a cake knife, because I used it for work a couple days before. and
You
I
never know
forgot
when
to
there's some
take it out.
emergency cake.
Yeah, if you can hold up a plane with a cake knife, you deserve to have the plane.
My
So I
son
had to-
was 9 months old, and they swabbed him for explosives. Like, come
You never
on.
know.
Like, the
Ugh.
laws of common sense have to be applied at some point. He was 9 months old, and they swabbed him for explosives. And I look at this barely high school graduate. I'm like, are you serious right now? Well, we have to. I'm like, you don't have to swab him because he's fucking 9 months old. Right?
Well, Zach, maybe you did do something to him when he was, that age that would have drove him to an extreme stance on something enough. So
that's a good
to-
point.
Yeah.
You never know. Maybe forced him to go to bed. I don't know.
Yep.
I never thought that I would relate to Vietnam vets.
Oh man.
That's been something that's been kind of striking to me over the past few weeks.
Yeah.
It's like, man,
Well,
it really hits you.
every generation needs their own Vietnam stew. Okay, so we can start taking bets on what the next one's gonna be because I don't
And
know.
we get to share it with 2 generations.
I know.
instead.
Well, we have
Right.
to. We skipped the last one, so we had to do a 20-year long war so that we can get everybody covered. So it's really just like efficient planning by the government, which is rare.
Donald Trump wouldn't be the man he is today if he hadn't gone through his STDs, his own personal Vietnam.
Oh man, that guy. I
Never.
think it's so laughable that he's calling for Joe Biden to resign. Like, you are equally responsible for this shit, dude.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're all responsible, but none more responsible than George W. fucking Bush himself.
Yep.
Oh yeah, it really breaks me up how sad he is about Afghanistan.
I'm sure he's devastated.
Oh, I just, I don't know. I think I would lean. I'm gonna put more of it on Obama just because George Bush had to deal with actually no, because I'm thinking of
it was
2004.
Cheney.
Never mind.
How much do you blame Bush? I think that kind of depends on how.
I got my years
How-
mixed up. Excuse
how
me.
there he
You're right, Kyle. I do think George W. Bush gets one. They get it because they were minutes away from getting Bin Laden, and they just stopped. And we just did a complete 180, and we looked at Iraq. And Lewis Black has a great stand-up bit about his theory on how we got to there. So if you haven't seen it, just look up like Lewis Black, Dick Cheney, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and it's awesome. Like he dropped the ball. He turned away. He looked at something else, and like the Afghanistan papers we've talked about, I think as early as 2004, 2005 was pointing out that this was a lost cause. So he knew, George W. Bush knew, and did nothing about it. And like we've said, Barack Obama campaigned on ending the war and did not. They very famously said in 2014 that all combat operations had ceased to end. That must be why we were still losing Americans in Afghanistan in 2017, because we had ceased all combat operations. All right, folks, thanks for sitting down and bearing through this as we deal with a flurry of emotions that we've dealt with over the past couple of days now. Mik, as always, you're more than welcome to come back whenever. Thanks for reaching out yesterday. I think it was good to get another voice in here to get some more perspective on it. And for those of you who are in the military community, I guess we are now, right? if you're dealing with some of this, you can always reach out to us. We have our various social media outlets. You can message us. Our email is theboardwalkpodcast@gmail.com. I've reached out to some individual just sites on my own, separate from the podcast, trying to figure out, like, trying to get some added perspective from other people to kind of like reassure that it wasn't all a giant waste, which isn't going over very well, but we try. So thanks for listening. Next week we are going to be talking about, if you're active on the Afghanistan subreddit, or if you're looking around on Twitter lately, the Taliban does not own the entire country. There is one province out north of Kabul called Panjshir, which is the home of the traditional Taliban military rivals. And we're going to be talking about this new Northern Alliance that is reconstituting up there, and apparently is planning to begin a counteroffensive on the Taliban. And if reports are true on Twitter, they've already started that. So we're gonna kind of get into a little bit of their history. We're going to talk about their founder, Ahmad Shah Massoud, the national hero of Afghanistan, and kind of where the Northern Alliance stands now. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll talk to you next week.